and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jah.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of our History Channel with Professor Cole Famula, and our special guest today is Jaltek Cassell, all the way from Australia. Ladies and gentlemen, this one is a doozy. Beautiful. If you are interested in Liberian history, today we have one of the best. We are talking about our former president, especially Arthur Barclay. And you thought you knew everything about Arthur Barclay, you are going to be flabbergasted. Today is classical history in the Liberian sense, and no other person than Cole is here to actually enlighten us on the mistake of Arthur Barclay. Ladies and gentlemen, do us a favor. Please share the show, as your friends may not be my friends. Make sure that everybody comes to class and get to know what Liberia is made of, especially from the perspective of President Arthur Barclay. Ms. Cole, welcome to the show. I'm only here as your guest, but this is your show. I know you have another guest here. Could you introduce yourself and then her? And let's get started. I can't wait. This is so beautiful.
Absolutely. It's always my pleasure to be here and share what I've discovered about Liberian history. And no, I'm not a professor. I'm a student of Liberian history. I enjoy the research. I'm a public policy person, but I do employ public policy and the connectivity of different disciplines that comes along with that. That's my approach to the research that I do. And so I do look at things holistically. I connect Liberia to other world events at the time period. So it is a very holistic approach at looking at the past. And really what this show is about is the people's history of Liberia. It's Liberian history from the perspective of its people, not from the perspective of those who despised the Black Republic. So we make a point to present the information as it unfolded, untainted with the cloud of white supremacy. We present Liberian history from a very African-centered perspective. I have with me one of the members of the Liberian History Guild and Save the States. If she would stop wiggling and smile at you all. A.M.A. Cassell, who is a herbalist, an activist, a history lover like myself, a researcher, and all-around patriotic Liberian citizen. I like to call her Jaltek. I just love how that name sounds, but she is here today. She's going to help me present. Arthur Barclay is also one of her favorite presidents. So she said, hey, I want to present with you on this particular subject. So I said, yes, you will. So Jaltek, please introduce yourself to the people.
Hello, everybody. And FOL, Mr. Human, thanks for having us. And Cole, my sister, thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk about one of my many favorite past presidents and founders or whatever of the country. And it's just a pleasure to be here to talk about. First of all, he's a very handsome man. Let's say that. And he was very intelligent and yeah, he did a lot. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity to be here.
Absolutely. So if he was Arthur Barclay's personality, Mr. Gaiman, was everyone described him as being stealth. He's the original poker face, quiet, and incredibly intelligent. At one point, described as the most educated man in Liberia.
Yeah.
This is what he was extremely brilliant, abnormally intelligent, and we'll unfold some of this genius of his later. But if still water runs deep were a human being, that person would be Arthur Barclay. If still water runs deep were a man, it would be Arthur Barclay. This guy was Mr. Poker Face, Mr. Never Sweat Under Pressure, never let your enemy know what you're thinking. That was Arthur Barclay, and we're going to unfold the story of this incredible person who literally saved the state. So I know a lot of people don't know much about Arthur Barclay, as we don't know a lot about many people in our past, because they were intentionally erased and downplayed because of their accomplishments. Because their accomplishments were an affront to European and American imperialism in Africa. So whenever you have these great people, what they try to do is they try to either erase their memory or they try to taint their memory with all kinds of propaganda. But what we've done is we've dug down to the primary sources, and we've gotten to the bottom of the stories of these presidents. And we are going to tell these stories as they were. So we are going to resurrect the memory of our past and remind us of the greatness that we have accomplished and what we must be able to do again. That's the whole reason of this. The reason you remember your past is so that you can understand what you've come from, what you've overcome, and therefore the mountains that are in front of you are nothing compared to what those who came before you were able to accomplish under much worse circumstances than we face today. So erasing people's history is the easiest way to conquer them, because it takes away their confidence, their self-esteem, their dignity. And this is restoring these people also restores our common dignity as African people. And African they were, African they knew they were, and African they died because they were African. They suffered because they were Africans, and they knew very much who they were. So with that, I'll go back to Mr. Gaiman. Do you have any questions before we start the presentation?
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please share this show. And I want you to know right off the bat, the two beautiful ladies here, they hail from Nimba County, and I want to know what is going on in Nimba.
She's from Bong.
Oh, okay. They are sister states, sister counties.
Yeah.
Bong, and we got Bong, Nimba, and Bassa on here, so we are fully represented.
The St. John River, the St. John River,
the St. John River that in Bassa we call the original Nile. That is the river that brings forth life between all of these counties. So we are very, very glad to be here. And I'm the luckiest guy to have these two beautiful, brilliant women. Tell us a little bit about Arthur Barclay. I mean, when you talk about Barclay, everybody think about Edwin, because I guess he's much closer to us.
Our time,
Arthur, but Arthur, as you were saying, he was a great man, and history will judge him right. Can we learn a little more about who this man is?
Yes. So Edwin Barclay, who was the light-skinned nephew of Arthur, Edwin was his older brother's son, and he was the president that preceded Tubman. He preceded our first dictator. So he preceded Tubman, but Arthur is his uncle, and Arthur is one of the most, we have had a lot of great presidents, but Arthur is one of those that's close to my heart. And I think, almost every president I come on here, I praise, we went back. But for Arthur, he is the first president of Liberia who was not a descendant of African Americans.
Yeah.
He was not born in America, nor was he a descendant of African Americans. He was a son of Barbados. He was born in Barbados. So that's an important distinction. And we'll get into why that becomes an issue. He's also the first president of Liberia to select an indigenous person as his vice president in the form of J.J. Dosen. And it's interesting that this isn't a big known issue in Liberia. Arthur Barclay and J.J. Dosen is the first time in Liberian history, 1904, that African Americans are not in control of the executive branch of government, or the descendants of African Americans. So you've got a Bayesian, right, which is more close, it's a Barbadian, and an indigenous Liberian born of two, in his own words, native parents. But we're going to do a show specifically about J.J. Dosen next Saturday, 7 days from today. But today it's about Arthur Barclay. I just wanted to mention that he was the first president that was not a descendant of African Americans, and his vice president was the first fully indigenous person to be vice president of Liberia. Also, the first indigenous to be later on the first chief justice that was indigenous. Again, we'll focus on J.J. Dosen next Saturday.
Next week.
But for now, we're going to talk about, as Jelata said, the handsome Arthur Barclay, the stealth Arthur Barclay. Mr. Stillwater runs deep. All right. So,
okay.
Give me 1 second. So, Jelata, can you go ahead and take over? You know.
Yeah. We're gonna start with saying that we all need to be very, very interested in Liberian history, because if our history was suppressed, and we know it was suppressed, so it's time for us to wake up our history. And if you don't know something, you can love it. So I want us to please be interested in, get to know us so we can love us more. So Arthur Barclay, seen here. This is the sketch of 1952, depicting him as almost white man with white blood or whatever. But you see here, they took this picture. Actually, they did this sketch from this picture here, and you can clearly see that he was a Negro true blood. But this at this time there, that was when they did all the sketch depicting our former presidents as white people, and almost white people, not white people, but that they were having white blood. That's the reason why they could govern the country, or that's the reason why they were intelligent, because the way they speak of Arthur Barclay's intelligence, no white man wanted to believe that a Negro, full-blooded Negro, could be that intelligent. So this should tell you where we are and why we are at that place. So this is the actual photograph here that they sketched this picture, this sketch from, and this was when they was doing the sketch for the stems in Liberia. And that was after the Berlin Conference. You people shouldn't forget that part. This was very intentional.
Yeah, let me just come in. So 1952 was right at that point where you had all these struggles for independence movements in all of Africa. 1952. That's when all of these African countries were starting to push against France and England and wanting to be sovereign. So there had to be this depiction that way back in the 1800s, these people in early 1900s, these people did not look like you Black Africans. They look like this. So this is part of the mind control. This is part of the propaganda that they used, the information, the disinformation campaign, to make not only other Africans, but Liberians to believe that the people who led their country were unlike themselves.
Yeah.
So that anybody that did anything great or accomplished anything of any significance looked like, this drawing. Because God forbid, little children in Buchanan or Ganta or Tapata or wherever, Harper, will see this Black Arthur Barclay from Barbados, of Dahomean descent, recent Dahomean descent, not even that far removed from Africa himself. He was only second generation in Barbados. But you looking at this very Black Bayesian man, and they, God forbid, they will have somebody to emulate. So there had to be this separation. This is not to say that mulattoes, as they called them in that time period, people with mixed race ancestry, were not also Africans and treated as such. But it needed to be said that those who were trying to divide and conquer us wanted to make sure that the majority of the population felt that they were different from the leaders. That they were not, that these people were leaders because they were closer to Europeans. They were closer. And so now, in the present day, we can see things that our grandparents did not see because we have access to the information. So the mindset that our forefathers had was based on not necessarily what they saw, but what they were told. And the images that were projected to them, and the wrong information that was driven into their minds and their subconscious about their own country, about their own leaders. So by the time 1952, Barclay had long been gone. Yeah. They start this, and they start pumping this not only in the minds of the children in the schools. This goes out globally and all over Africa. These images, from Liberia today, which was the USAID propaganda tool during the Tubman administration.
It's a good thing that at least you really brought this out, because even today we still got these pictures going around, those kids in the market, those kids. This it's really important for us that we should know who these people were. This is just war. It's just war against us. Yeah.
So every single show we do, we make sure that we show you their actual photographs and say this is what the president actually looked like. And people say, but why is that important? If it isn't important, why do you think they went out of their way to draw them ridiculously like this? Because they know it's important. They know that it affects your psyche, your psychological understanding of yourself and the world. This is an act of war. And it's disinformation is an act of war. When someone wants to conquer you, when someone wants to exploit you, they need to do these mind-bending things to subjugate you psychologically. It's so much more powerful than subjugating you physically. And I want everyone to understand that this is not an accident. It was an intentional and calculated act of war against the Black Republic. And we will go into, go ahead.
I understand in the social sciences, in sociology in particular, there's something we call the mind colonization. They colonize your mind. Even if they are not around, they will still live in your head rent-free, they say.
Yes.
Where you perpetrate what they want. And at some point in Liberia, most of us, when you look at the former president, Anthony David Gardner, there's no way you could look at Gardner and say he was Black. Okay? So those of us who grew up in that time, like you said, rightfully said, we did not look and we did not aspire to be president because we felt like those positions was reserved for people who look like them.
Yes.
Thank you.
And Gardner was an African. He was a Black man. He was descendant of African Americans, but he was clearly a Black man. And you know, it's heartbreaking, but it is something that we need to understand and recognize. And almost every document written about Liberia carries this intentional and false narrative. And it's sickening that we hold on to it because we don't have anything else. We haven't seen anything else. And maybe they didn't believe that this day would come where the sons and daughters of Liberia would be curious enough to go dig behind in archives and look at primary sources for themselves.
Yeah.
Because even here in the United States, the mantra was, if you want to hide something from a Black man, I'm paraphrasing, they use a derogatory term, you hide it in a book. And even if that Black man likes to read, he will only read what you give him to read.
So, Carl, what is it we are looking at now on here?
So, Jalate can take over from him. This is a sugarcane plantation in Barbados in the mid-19th century.
Yeah, this is just depicting what Barbados looked like back then. And what Barbados looked like. You said?
You can just go ahead and present on the slides.
Yeah, so it says that slavery in Barbados was abolished in 1834. However, this by no means solved the problems of the former enslaved. The Abolition Act was hastily written and contained many ill-defined clauses, making it open to exploitation. So this is it. This is in 1834 they abolished the slave trade in Barbados, but it didn't give the people their human right, their inherent human right to live a life, to get what a human deserved in a society. It was still kind of slavery because they brought up us in what you find they were being forced labor. It was still happening then. All the bad things that the only thing they removed slavery, but it was literally still slave time. We shouldn't forget this is where these people came from.
So so what they did was they replaced the slave trade itself was abolished by the British, in much earlier. This is actually abolishing slavery, but they replace it now with They replaced the slavery with what they call an apprentice scheme. So now you're forced to work. They call it apprenticeship. You're supposed to be learning a trade, but you're doing so for free. You're not being compensated properly. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on.
Yeah, you're not being paid for your labor. You're not having regular time. It's just your human rights is nowhere around anyway. So
Yes.
And this is the Barbados. We're saying this because this is the Barbados these people came from. We should understand what the British was still doing in the world. We should understand what the not even the British, the Western world was still doing in the world. And then let's compare it to our Liberia that was stopping these things from happening. These are places that we should look at when we're talking about Liberia. When we try to say, oh, Liberia did this, let's look at what the world was at that time.
Yeah.
With somebody telling you, oh, don't do this in your country, at the same time they're doing that every other place in the world. But we rather listen to that white man because we feel they know everything, and then our own people that did great things will take away from them. So these are places we should always look to. The people still working literally as slaves. Only the paper says they are not slaves.
Yes. Next slide, please.
So next slide, please. And that would be you,
Thank you.
That would be.
So basically, you can keep going. You can do these three about the history of Barbados, and I'll pick up from there.
Oh yeah, okay. So it says here slavery was replaced, as my sister said, slavery was replaced by apprenticeship scheme. When the apprenticeship scheme ended, many laborers celebrated and sang the folk song beginning "Lick and Clack Up Done With." However, their problems were still not over. So let's look at this. When this apprenticeship scheme was stopped, the people sang a song. This song said "Lick and Clack and Lock Up Done With," meaning the beating, the locking up is finished. To tell you what the apprenticeship scheme was, imagine the thinking and rejoicing that the apprenticeship scheme is over. That means they were still suffering under that
So they were still enslaved, basically, even when it ended the apprenticeship scheme. And the apprenticeship scheme did not end until almost the mid 20th century. Earlier 20th century. So you talk about 1920, 1930. So they were really still being subjugated and brutalized up until long after Barclay was president. They were still being abused. Next slide, please.
So that would be you. Where's this next slide?
All right. So basically, slavery was replaced. I think we already talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about that. So we'll go on to the next slide. So basically, this is an actual photograph of Joseph Jenkins Roberts. That's the source of this photo is the Library of Congress. Now, some of the photos are digitally restored. And so there's some artist depictions, or this particular one is not digitally restored. This particular one is exactly how Roberts appeared when Augustus Washington photographed him in 1854. So this is what Joseph Jenkins Roberts actually looked like without any alteration. It looks like he had light color eyes. His hair clearly is black man's hair. So this lie about how he could pass for white in America of all places is just absurd. Because nobody looking like this is going to be called white in the United States of America. So this is some more of the stories that don't make a whole lot of sense. So I just wanted, the reason we're bringing up Roberts is because in the year, on the 16th of May, 1848, the father of Arthur Barclay writes this letter to President Joseph Jenkins Roberts upon his arrival in Barbados. So in the year 1848, this is 1 year after our independence, 1 year after Roberts becomes president of Liberia. Roberts, looking like this, knowing he's an African, goes to Barbados to encourage people in Barbados to emigrate to Liberia, because Barbados had created a colonization society under the British, where they were supposed to be going mostly to, at that time, the region around Freetown, which was not yet a country, but they wanted to settle in the vicinity of Freetown. Robert goes and tells them, hey, come to Liberia. Because of these apprenticeships, you people have skills that we can use in Liberia. You are literate. You have literate people who can read and write. We need teachers. You have people who know how to make clothes. You're tailors. You have people that have all these skills. Instead of going to the British, be a British subject in West Africa, come to Liberia, where we are an independent country. So I can't really see too well to read that, but if anyone can you please read the letter with it? This excerpt from the letter. Zlata, are you able to see it?
We were back.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So to His Excellency President Roberts, Barbados, 16 May 1847. The President of the Republic of Liberia. We, the Barbados Colonization Society, for assisting in suppression of the slave trade and the introduction of civilization in Africa, feel happy in having this opportunity of spending Your Excellency with an address. Within, we heartedly congratulate you on your safe arrival at Barbados, but most especially at a time when a large portion of our brethren inhabitants of this island have formed themselves into a society for the purpose of immigrating to the western coast of Africa with intention of forming a settlement in the land of the forefathers. And it stopped there.
Yeah.
So it stopped there.
So basically in the land, I stopped it there because it's a very long letter, but I just wanted to point out that he was talking about going to the land of their forefathers. This is the father of Arthur Barclay writing Joseph Jenkins Roberts. This is before Barclay is even born. Arthur Barclay hasn't even been born yet. His father is the president of this Barbados Colonization Society. Arthur Barclay's father was also he was what the British considered a troublemaker, but he was a freedom fighter. He was an activist. He was extremely politically conscious. He was anti-British, and he felt that the only way that African people could excel is if they all returned to the continent, put their skills together, and stood up for themselves as a unit. So Arthur Barclay's father is a Pan-Africanist in the mid-1800s, before we ever hear of a Marcus Garvey. This is a Back to Africa movement, the Barbados Colonization Society. This is a Back to Africa movement organically created by African people in the Caribbean to go back. And here's President Roberts, an African-American from Virginia, first Black president on the continent of Africa, going to Barbados and saying, hey, you have a home in Liberia. I hear you people want to come to Liberia. Next slide, please. Any questions on that before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, let's look at the term that keep permeating your presentation here is the apprenticeship.
Yeah.
When you become an apprentice, basically you are trained to take over the authority from whence you come. So could some of the negativity in slavery and the treatment of these folks, could that have rubbed off on some of these folks as well? I know there was some good, but obviously there was some bad.
So the apprenticeship, in this sense, was not. It was a fancy word for an indentured servant, right? So it's not an apprenticeship like we use in modern terms. In those days, it was a term of servitude. Even a lot of the recaptured Africans that were rescued were forced into these apprenticeships, where you had to work and do things under the control and the subordination of another person. So there was apprenticeships occurring in Liberia as well later on, but it wasn't necessarily imported by the people from Barbados, because this was really a British system that was existing in Sierra Leone. And there was also a lot of cross-cultural interaction between what the British called their subjects and what Liberians called their citizens. So you read, Liberia refers to its people as citizens. The British refers to its Black people as their subjects. Subjects. So yes, there is a legacy of apprenticeship that occurs in Liberia as well, especially among recaptured Africans and indigenous people who were rescued early on and were also treated similarly as recaptured Africans. And when I say indigenous people, people who were liberated at Trade Town and other slave factories, they're treated no differently really from the actual recaptured Africans that were brought on ships. They use the same methodology to Christianize and Westernize them, in their terms, to civilize them.
Before you go to the next slide, real quick, the reason this came up was I was reading one of the concession agreement in former Lamco, and then Metal Steel, and then it just came up again in the Western cluster, where it is actually written in the contract that these people in 5 to 10 years will create like an apprenticeship program where they will train Liberians to take over. But the downside to that is when these folks leave, even though they are white and they have left, their system, they will have colonized the minds of these folks and will have created the same system, even though this time being perpetrated by dark-skinned folks.
I think that that's quite a stretch, because in the modern sense, we're talking about more than 100. This is 100 years ago. Almost, we're talking about, in fact, this particular situation right now, we are pretty much in the year 1848. So this is almost 200 years ago. So the language and the definition of apprenticeships has changed. I see the analogy you're trying to draw, but I don't think it is correctly analogous to Western cluster in a sense, because that's not really a forced labor camp the way that these things were. We will get into those discussions in the future. There was much injustice with our concession agreements, but I don't want us to overlap time periods, and I don't want us to read history backwards. We want to go chronologically forward so we can truly understand. So that will really kind of skew the understanding of the past, because what happened in modern times came out of the past to an extent, but you cannot understand the past from the modern time backward. You can only understand modern times by looking at the past forward. And that's very important with the study of history, to not project what happened today onto the past. The past explains how today happened. Today does not explain the past. It's a very big difference. Chronology of events is very important in understanding how things unfolded. So the next slide. This is now President Roberts in Barbados. President Roberts is now in Barbados in 1848, in the month of May, 1 year after Liberia's independence. He makes this very profound statement. If you can blow it up a little bit so I can see. Go back, you're one slide ahead, whoever's controlling the slide.
The one with the African repository?
No, we're supposed to be on slide number. We're supposed to be on slide number 7.
Number
please.
7.
Who's controlling the slideshow?
Slide
number 7. Okay.
Yeah, slide number 7 was supposed to be on. Yeah,
we're there. Okay, so President, if you can blow it up a little bit. Okay, so President Roberts addressed the meeting. The flag is flying over it. It's supposed to be the behind the flag there. So President Roberts addressed the meeting. He had 20 years experience in Liberia, and he had lost all doubts as to its certain prosperity. So basically, he doesn't doubt that Liberia is going to be, successful. He's very confident at this point. The colony and the republic there has done more to suppress and root out the slave trade than the combined efforts of the natives of France and England. He gave some facts in illustration of this. Can you blow it up a little bit? Which have already been published in the periodicals of the Colonization Society. So basically, This is a excerpt from, and I have the source there, which is the African Repository Colonial Journal, Volume 14. Or is that Volume 24? I think I can't see that too well. In 1848, I think that's Volume 24. Okay, so basically, what he is saying. This is from Robert's mouth. One thing I want to point out that I absolutely love that he says here, he calls these white people natives of France and England. Do you see? Do you see the how he gets them? Because every day we native, he said we Liberians have done more to suppress the slave trade than the natives of France and England. So we're natives of Africa, you're natives of Europe, and we've done more to suppress the slave trade. I love that in 1848, Joseph Jenkins Roberts refers to Europeans as natives. That's powerful on so many levels. And he says they've done more to suppress the slave trade than the natives of Europe. And he also says something important here too. Besides calling them natives, he's saying that he doesn't have any doubts of the potential of Liberia and its potential prosperity. You see the positive outlook at this point. The country is not even a year old. It's only May. We have not even had our first independence yet. And this man is out in the world working, trying to bring skills back to the country to help to bring it forward. He's mostly looking for teachers, for nurses, for people that with other skills that can come back to Liberia and help to advance the society. And he's focused on Barbados.
He was a great salesman. Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, he was a very good salesman, skilled and very optimistic. I mean,
yeah,
even as bleak as things were, he was very optimistic and bubbly. We encourage other folks to follow through. Yes, beautiful, 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 beautiful.
Yeah. So the next slide. Basically, I just wanted to show who signed the letter. Anthony Barclay, chairman. If you see that is Arthur Barclay's father. He was 39 years old. He was 39 years old when he was chairman of the Barbados Colonization Society. And he was a heretic. He was a radical. His wife's father was also a radical in the sense that they were really these are the Dahomean Barbadians. So these are people of Dahomey descent, the Barclays, and they were not long removed from Dahomey, because this is a man who was not born in Barbados but was sold into slavery from Dahomey and arrived in Barbados as a child. These are the people who had the slave revolts in Barbados. The rebellion against slavery is what led to the British abolishing slavery and bringing it back in another form, which was almost as bad. But they didn't abolish slavery because they wanted to abolish slavery. They abolished slavery because they were bringing these Africans into the Caribbean, into the sugar plantations. And these Africans were warriors. They had been fighting war for a long time. So you had a lot of uprisings in Jamaica and all of these places against slavery. The British were like, you know what? Let's take our hand out of this. And in fact, before they abolished slavery, they abolished the slave trade because they didn't want any more Africans coming and adding up to the fire. It was easier to control people who were born in captivity than those who were born free and put into captivity. They figured that out quick when you started having these rebellions popping up all over the place. You know, so these are some of the names of the people that were members. I just wanted to quickly point out that Anthony Barclay was the chairman. This is the father of Arthur Barclay, who was not yet born when this letter was written. Next slide, please. Amy?
Yeah. But Barbados has a population more dense than any other portion of the civilized world. It has a surface of only 252 square miles, being 21 by 12 miles, with 160,000 souls. This gives an average of 635 people to the superficial mile. It is the most industrious population under the sun. it produces 50,000 whole heads of sugar or a ton, 2,240 pounds each per annum. That is huge. Harper's Weekly, 1880.
Yeah, so that was the source of Harper's Weekly. So Barbados, you could go back and look these things up. Barbados was considered one of the most populated, densely populated places on the planet.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was extremely densely populated, mostly with people who were somewhat semi-liberated, semi-captive. The next slide depicts, well, this particular picture, before you go to the next slide, this depicts women carrying coal to the harbor to offload onto a ship. So you see all the women with a coal on their heads. I mean, women being used as beasts of burden.
Yeah, so that part of the apprenticeship there.
Yeah.
People.
So the next slide also, this is Bridgetown, Barbados. This is a community. Basically, these resemble the slave huts that you see all around the South preserved, like, you know, on the Georgia Seacoast Islands, all over around here, South Carolina. But this is basically where in 1880, this is what Bridgetown looked like. You had these kind of plantation style homes for the people living in the semi-condition of slavery. These semi-free.
And this is where our president was born.
Yes. So in May of this is what you're looking at next on the slide is basically the ship manifest. I do this all the time when we do these presidents. I try the ones who were imported into the country or migrated or emigrated to the country. We'd look at the manifest that the record of their arrival or the record of the arrival of their ancestors. In this particular case, Arthur Barclay was born in Bridgetown in May of 1864. And that's not the year he was born. That's the year he emigrated to Liberia. So Arthur Barclay goes to Liberia with his parents and 7 siblings. So Anthony Barclay, who wrote that letter, who was head of the Barbados Colonization Society, now is on the brig Cora to Liberia with a couple hundred other Bajans relocating to Liberia, you know, in 1864. There's a lot of reasons that they didn't get to go to to Liberia right away when Roberts went there. The British really wanted to thwart this. It was not in the best interest of the Europeans to have Arthur Barclay's father, Anthony Barclay, pour a bunch of people into Liberia. So between that time period, a lot of Bajans and other Caribbean people are going to the British-controlled area of what would become the country of Sierra Leone or the colony of Sierra Leone. It isn't yet a colony in 1864. And it took a lot of resources for them to finally be able to come to Liberia. And it was way in 1864 that this first group came on the brig Cora. So that's very important to note. Now, there were others who the British had transported, to the vicinity of Liberia, who were also living in various coastal settlements along the Liberian coast. The British, again, would consider those that they brought to Liberia as their subjects, and those who were Liberian are considered Liberian citizens. This is very important to explain Arthur Barclay's story. Now, I've got a blue arrow here on Ernest Barclay, who's Arthur Barclay's brother. He was 18 years old when he arrived. Ernest Barclay goes on to become Secretary of State. Ernest Barclay also is Edwin Barclay's father. His younger brother, Arthur, who's 8 years his junior, was 10 years old when they arrived. So I just wanted to point Ernest out because he had a significant role in Liberian history as well, because he became Secretary of State. And Arthur, of course, ended up wearing many hats. We can go to the next slide, please.
Before you go to the next slide, okay. I really like the way they put them in chronological order, but they also put forth in the second column it looks like their professions.
Yes, yes.
And
Okay,
then,
you wanted
and
to
then
go over that?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the third column, their faith or their affiliation. I think they were mostly Episcopalians.
Yes.
Uh,
So there were two sisters who were in their 20s who were one was a teacher who was Elizabeth Ann, and then Mary Augusta, she was basically a dressmaker. That's what that means. And they were Wesleyan, which is a denomination that was common in the Caribbean.
wow, awesome.
So everybody else
Mhm.
they were Episcopalians.
Episcopalian.
Before we go to the next slide, ladies and gentlemen, this is one class that you don't want to miss. Please share the show. As your friend may not be my friend, as we always say, share the show. Bring somebody else on here. This is historic for you to actually look at a historical document that tells you when they left, what they did when they came to Liberia, and even the church or their faith, their
It's so
affiliation.
important.
If you are Episcopalian, you need to be on here to see from whence you came. And Wesleyan, I don't know if we have any lingering churches in Liberia anymore, but I know the Episcopalians are very strong. This
Yes.
is great.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, please share this show. This is beautiful. You need to be in this class. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. So now I'll just turn over to AMA because my throat getting dry.
Okay.
And she's able to
Go
handle
ahead.
it too. Talk small, yeah, my sister.
Like, yeah, my people. Yeah, my people, as Mr. Kemo was saying, yeah, we really got to pay attention to these things. This is a gift for us to be able to reach out to these our documents. It's a gift. Let's share. Let's get interested. Okay, this is a photo of this is G.W. Gibson here in the middle. It says here, 1873. Arthur Barclay graduated from Liberia College, which is LU today. Became private secretary to President Roberts. So this is how he was claiming, he was claiming the ladders because of his performances, his intellect, his intelligence. And in 1877, he became the principal of the preparatory department. Liberia College LU, he was admitted to the bar of Maserati County.
So
So
Arthur
1870,
Barclay, yeah, Arthur Barclay, I want to explain the photo. So this is G.W. Gibson in the center,
the middle,
seated with
yeah.
his leg crossed with the dark pants. To G.W. Gibson's right, our left, is Sir Arthur Barclay, who has the red arrow pointing to him. So that is the Stillwater Run Deep Arthur Barclay, and they're seated as leaders at the university, and standing behind them are graduates. I love this photo for so many reasons.
Very much.
One of the things that you will hear in Liberian history over and over again is how the country was run by mulattoes. All the administrators at the University of Liberia were mulattoes, or Liberia College were mulattoes. All the students were mulattoes. I mean, I've read that repeatedly, and people say that
Yes, I
in
have.
history books. But the photographic record and the written primary record does not support the narrative at all.
Doesn't.
You have in this photo, sitting to the left of G.W. Gibson. Sitting to the left of G.W. Gibson, you have a light-skinned person that could be considered mulatto. I'm not sure who it is, so I'm not going to, pretend to know his genealogy. But he's very, very light-skinned. Standing in the graduating class, all standing together, no distinction. Third from the left is a very fair-skinned person standing in the middle of dark-skinned people. Everyone is seated, nobody's segregated. Everyone's standing, nobody's segregated. They are all there together. So this narrative that there was this extreme divide, where is the divide when these people are going to school together? And if you look at their faces, you cannot tell who is African American. You cannot tell who is indigenous.
No.
You cannot tell who is Congo.
No.
Congo meaning
The
the descendants of
Africans.
recaptured Africans. And this is powerful. These are university
Very.
graduates. This is the future of the country, and they are all together. This is what made Liberia dangerous for imperialism. Because as much as they tried to divide, it was not the reality. People were still hauled together. Liberia was still proceeding at this point in history as it should have at this point in history.
Real quick, could we guess by any means how old these folks were?
No, I mean, which folks? G.W. Gibson. So the year of this photo was taken was either 1878 or 1877. You know, and we know that Arthur Barclay was born in 1832. So you can do the math.
So they were in the 40s,
thinking,
and the student may have been much younger, actually.
This is a young kid right in the corner here, very young.
We don't know if he was young or if he was just short. We're speculating here.
I know, right?
Okay, so short people have a right, should be respected too. Maybe he was 21 like his friends, or in his 20s like his friends. We don't know. Yeah,
I know, right?
Somehow we got some Bossa people. We got a lot of people in bread and time that were not very tall.
Slow
down. Put some respect on the brother. And you know, the Bossa people, they've been things for a very long time. Oh, I know that man from Limba. Oh, I know.
He may have been a 14-year-old genius from Barbados.
He could have been a genius. I wish I knew the names of these students. I'm going to keep trying to dig, and if I can find the names of the students, I'll let y'all know. I'm sure it's documented somewhere. But, you know, we can't tell your age from the picture out there. People supposed to be Anyway.
Well, that's a powerful picture, though. You're right. It's very powerful. It says what Liberia is.
Yes. AMA, if you want to continue with this one.
Oh, yeah, you got me enjoying you. Like, I every day class, how we can do, I enjoying you.
1880.
In 1880, he earned the rank of Counselor of the Supreme Court. In 1883, he was appointed by President Russell as judge of the Court of Quarterly Sections of Monserrate County. Wow.
Yes. So
and this is an actual picture from there. Anyway, go ahead.
So in 1883, so he becomes just same system like in Liberia today. You graduate, you get admitted to your county bar before you get committed to the bar of the Supreme Court after your apprentice. He went through that process, became Monserrate, bar, and then became part of the national bar through the Supreme Court. Then that was in 1880. So now he's a lawyer. And in 1883, President Russell, who was our most light-skinned president ever.
Light-skinned president.
They try to say that Robert's hair was about as nappy as Gelato's hair.
Oh, nappy.
So I don't know where they were coming from with that, but Russell, who was actually very, very fair-skinned, he appointed Barclay as a to the Court of Quarterly Sessions because of his genius. So this photograph is very faded, but if you see the arrow, it's pointing to Arthur Barclay sitting behind that table. So if you can blow it up small, that's Arthur Barclay, the red arrow is pointing to. And he always has the same look on his face in every photograph. Mr. Stillwater runs deep. Very dignified, very stealth, very stoic, very stoic. You can never read his mind or his thoughts. This is what was consistently written about him. And the British hated this later on, but because of their racism and their bias, they did not think that he was outsmarting them. They underestimated this man. We're going to get into that next, but I just wanted to point out here is Sir Arthur Barclay, the lawyer, Counselor Barclay, sitting there, Court of Quarterly Sessions, Monserrate County, presidential appointee, very proud of himself. So this quote is one of Gelato's favorite quotes. I'll let her read that. She wanted to insert this into the slideshow. Go ahead.
Yeah. I love the way people that wrote about him from a very good perspective, that the respect they had for him. Even those that didn't like him in those days, they did still have a lot of respect for his genius, for the way he carried himself, for the class that he was at his time, you know. So one of my favorite, it says the legal professions in Monrovia has some strong men. Secretary Arthur Barclay is a man of vast knowledge and a jurist, and that this was when he was Secretary of Treasury. Anthony General Johnson is also a lawyer of keen judicial perception and has few equals in the Republic. Honorable T. W. Hunt has won his spurs long since. Captain Anthony F.W. Ward is a raging young lawyer. Senator J.J. Ross, Representatives Wright and Brooks, Honorable Dawson, and Justice Rowell are men whom any court would recognize. But we give the sketch of one of the most painstaking, industrious attorneys in Liberia. Clients always feel safe in his hands. That was Arthur Barclay. This is his description
I
in
was
his career.
just powerful. Clients always feel safe
I
in
mean,
his
among
hands.
all these great people, but he was an
He,
outstanding
yeah,
man.
he was not a big talker. And here's the thing that's also important to note about Arthur Barclay. Arthur Barclay has some of the most powerful clients. He didn't just represent Liberians. This is where my theory, this part is Call's theory. Disclaimer, disclaimer, these are my thoughts, okay? This is not substantiated, but I'm drawing a conclusion or a hypothesis based on what I've studied. So here is it. Here's what I think. I think that Arthur Barclay took these powerful British and Americans on as clients so that he could spy, so he could understand what they were doing. Later on, you're going to see that Arthur Barclay represents Firestone. And then he represents Liberia in that Fernando Post scandal, which we'll discuss at a future date in better detail. I removed the slides from the presentation, but I want you to understand that Arthur Barclay positioned himself consistently to understand what other people were doing.
Yeah.
I want you to also understand, before we get into the next segment of this discussion, that Arthur Barclay was considered by the British to be a British subject.
Yeah.
First, and a Liberian citizen second. So they trusted him because other British subjects within Liberia were loyal to Britain.
Loyal to them.
Even many indigenous people in Liberia were loyal to England over Liberia. Have been coaxed by the British to form an alliance. So they just naturally assumed, because also Arthur was so stoic, that Arthur also was a British subject. Quiet, humble, respectful, yet dignified. They did not see who he actually was. His father's son. Arthur Barclay was his father's revolutionary Africanist son. And the British did not know this until it was too late.
They underestimated him.
Then they tried to kill him, but we're going to get into that soon. So Arthur Barclay is given access to work as a lawyer because he was very, very brilliant, more brilliant than than all of the British agents that were in the vicinity and within Liberia. So Arthur Barclay was allowed to draft contracts. He was there seeing everything that they were doing while he served as a lawyer. This is extremely important. Next slide, please. So now, I put this here because this is one of my favorite pictures. These are three members. Our Supreme Court, at the turn of the century, the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, 1901, only had 3 justices. And Chief Justice Z.B. Roberts, he's the one in the center. You have Justice Richardson on the left and Justice Tolliver on the right.
Mm.
Forgive me if I call you professor, because I'm in your class here. This Roberts is different from the J.J. Roberts, though, right?
Justice Roberts.
Yes.
So yes, this is not the same Roberts. That's correct.
Okay, great. I mean,
So
if you are listening, when you look at the names that are listed on these pages, I recognize a lot of the names, like the Brooks, the Wrights, in Bassa in particular, the Worrell, very, very prominent there. Dawson. I mean, if you are a student of history, or if you are Liberian, this is your lineage here.
Yes.
And the worlds are Bassa people.
Yes,
that's
I know them. I know the family very
they're
well.
Bassa people. So this idea that Bassa people were not citizens or Grebo people were not citizens. Grebo, Bassa, these were people who were running the country. You have to remember sheer numbers. By 1900, the educated coastal indigenous people outnumber the educated Americo-Liberians, just sheer numbers, because the number of schools. This place had schools being built as early as 1822 by Lot Carey. He opened the very first school the year he arrived at Cape Mesurado for native children and recaptured Africans. So the indigenous, sorry?
I like, real quick, I like, in recognition of their excellence and their brilliance.
Yes.
I think the author said Johnson has earned his spurs. I like that.
Powerful. Powerful. And these are people. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just want to state that the normal narrative that the dark-skinned people were not having position. How come you got three or justices sitting here and they're all three dark-skinned men? I just want to make that point.
The three wise men of the country in 1900.
There they are.
Were not mulatto. The ones who were making, when the Supreme Court speaks, no one speaks after. No one speaks after them. So this idea that there was this caste system in Liberia, this does not mean that there were not rich mulatto merchants walking around arrogantly in Monrovia. That is not what this means. Just because Worrell and others have positions of power doesn't mean all indigenous people on the coast had access to everything that they had access to. What it is saying is these statements are not absolute. And we cannot say that we had a system of apartheid and a color caste system in Liberia, because the record does not support that narrative. That narrative is a lie. Was there a class system? Yes, the whole world had a class system where you have elite people in the society, and those are the ones who were educated. And among the educated elite, there was an additional class system where those who descended from the United States had always had the presidency until Barclay took over. But to say that indigenous people were not citizens and did not have access is false.
Could it be the old mantra or concept in Africa where we say the hunter tells the story of the hunted? So those who were in power wrote that narrative by, like you rightfully noted, to the point they were so powerful, or those who had the power to even change the photography, they touch up to reinvent that the intelligentsia were much lighter than it was. Maybe those who were in power, or those who were actually pushing the button, like you said, the colonialists.
This was, Mr. Gaiman, this is not something that Liberians did. This is something that was done. The whitening of the presidents was done by the American government. That was a straight up CIA hit, because the person who's responsible for doing so worked for the Smithsonian. He was hired through USAID as a consultant to Liberia, sent by the US government, and this is what he produced. So this is not a mystery. We know who did the pictures, and he did this during the Truman era, so it wasn't Liberians who did this. You know, you need a stamp collection. You need to market the country. So they come out and make all. Tubman didn't have a clue what Daniel Bashir Warner looked like. Daniel Bashir Warner died before he was born.
Yeah.
You know, so they come out, they drew everybody to look white except Tubman. Even E.J. Roy, they made him to look like he was some kind of Spaniard or something.
So
these images, I mean, to this day, on our currency in Liberia, they're still using those 1952 photos that were done by this USAID consultant, they called it. This was a straight up hit against the country. Many other things happened during this era. You're talking about the building of VOA, the Omega Tower. You're fighting the Cold War. You're in the height of it. Information control. And Liberia is the U.S. hub for all of this. So the greatest victim of this disinformation that there was propaganda that was spreading is the place that was hosting the disinformation center. And they also have control of the school curriculum through the churches. And many of those who were controlling the curriculum in the 1930s and 40s, even as far as the 1920s, were coming from the south of the United States, the southern states. What was happening in the southern states? The southern states were deeply segregated, extremely racist. And these are the people who will not even allow Black children into school with their children, who will not allow Black people to enter restaurants with them, who will not allow Black people to drink the same water they drink, attend the same churches they attend. They leave from that environment and go to Liberia to open schools. What do you think they're going to do to the Liberian child's mind?
Mm-hmm.
So this was an act of aggression and war. This is not an accident. And they documented what they did. Mm-hmm. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. Jalata, you can continue. Yeah.
Okay. 1880 earned the rank. He earned the rank of Consular of the Supreme Court. 1883, appointed by President Russell as judge of the Court of Quarter Sessions. 1885, President Johnson appointed him sub-treasurer of Monserrate County. 1892, he was mayor of Monrovia, postmaster general, appointed by President Cheeseman. 1894, Secretary of State. Wow. 1896, Secretary of Treasury. 1904, President of Liberia.
Wow.
And here
he
is.
Was great. He was, chief.
Once again, red arrow pointing to Sir Arthur Barclay, Honorable Arthur Barclay. This picture was taken when he was Secretary of State under G.W. Gibson. G.W. Gibson is seated there on the left of ours, on our left, and there he is with I think that's Honorable Moore and Honorable Williams, and then you have, I think it's Honorable Grimes. I think I can't read what that says, but I'm guessing. I cannot see. I apologize, but I think that's Honorable Grimes behind or next to Barclay and behind Garrison Gibson.
Yes.
And Gibson is seated, and then I think to the right, seated next to him is H.A. Williams, is Honorable Williams, and I think that's Mr. Moore, Honorable Moore behind him. So that's the cabinet of G.W. Gibson, and he was a prominent member of the cabinet. There he is with his hand in his shirt. We all know what that means. And then we're going to go on to the next slide.
Call you. Okay. Yeah. Arthur Barclay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Arthur Barclay, the newly elected president of Liberia, is of pure African stock. Born in, that's a mistake.
I just want to point this. I just read it. Yep, I'm gonna go on. This is American publication.
Born in Jamaica when his parents immigrated to the African Republic when he was still a child. He has already held several government positions there, amongst them those of Postmaster General and Secretary of Treasury. At his inauguration, which takes place in December, Mr. Barclay will become the president since Liberia became independent in 1847.
Right.
So
So
I
we
was
all
not
know that he
public.
was the 15th president and he was actually
Yeah,
born in Barbados and not Jamaica. But
yeah.
I wanted to take this excerpt from this publication called The Argonaut, which was published in 1877 in San
877.
Francisco. So I just wanted to show how far, even though it was not completely accurate, but how far the news of this man's election reached the world. It was all the way in California. Remember, there's no telephones and telegraphs at this time.
No.
There's no so sometimes communication got skewed a little bit. I don't think these mishaps in the paper were deliberate. As far as these people are concerned, the British West Indies are all Jamaica, right? So the British West Indies is all Jamaica, and they didn't really care for the accuracy. But it's important to note that this was announced all over the world.
All over.
The British
Wild and
papers
fast.
also have this man as a subject of the British government. I want to also point out when Barclay becomes president, the Liberians, especially those old school African Americans who were anti J.J. Roberts, because Barclay was a protege of Roberts. One of the things I want to mention, when Barclay arrived, his father Anthony died when he was just 11. So a year after they arrived from Barbados, Anthony Barclay, who had been an ally of Roberts, dies. So some of the reason Arthur Barclay is taken in by Roberts as a secretary and a person to kind of take under his wing during Roberts' second presidency is because this young man lost his father really young. And Anthony Barclay was someone that J.J. Roberts respected. So we always talk about this whole color casting and all this foolishness, and the mulatto people ain't respect the black people. Here's J.J. Roberts basically being like a father to Arthur Barclay until his death. So there was a lot of people who did not trust Arthur Barclay when he became president, and they even rumored that Barclay was not duly elected and that the British manipulated for him to get to where he was. There may be truth to this. Because again, Barclay, before he becomes president, was very close to these Western imperialists and working for them as an attorney. So me, Carl, and Gelate, and Mr. Gaiman, if we were alive back then, we would not have trusted Barclay either. We would have been like, man, this guy is a stooge for the West. We didn't vote for him. How he became president? And so there's two possibilities. One of the possibilities is people wanted to elect someone to the presidency who was not of American descent. The other possibility is the British and other powers that be manipulated the election and made sure that they put a stooge into office, a British subject. So this is a small excerpt from his annual message, December 15, 1904. Zlata?
Fellow citizens of the Senate and the House of Representatives, in accordance with the provision of the organic statute of our state, we are here today to review the progress of our affairs during the past year, as well as to take such counsel as may upon mature consideration and reflection appear most fit and proper for the further guidance and direction of the business and interests of the Republic.
Awesome. But if you were British, or even as an ordinary person, if you had somebody that's so competent and capable, somebody that had worked for you, somebody in whom you trust, I don't think it was even. Well, I shouldn't say this, but he turned out to be the right guy for the right job at the right time.
The British interests are not African people's interests. The British are not there to help Africans. They're there to conquer, exploit, and subjugate.
I think that's much.
The British presence in Africa is of the presence of a malicious, vindictive, murderous, marauders enemy. They were not our friends. They did not come
Still
to
nothing.
Africa to help Africans. They came to Africa to exploit and extract resources. So if that is the mindset of the British, and you are an African and you know that you are an African, you're not brainwashed to think that you and the British have the same interests, you would know that if the British are supporting this guy, he cannot be your friend. But the problem was they were so effective in convincing, especially we native people who were not too aware of how incredibly malicious they were, that they were our allies. And were quite often able to incite many indigenous people against the Republic. Because we have what I like to call xenophilia. Instead of having xenophobia, we are in love with things from the outside of ourselves. Instead of having fear, which is xenophobia, which is you hate things that are different from you. We have the polar opposite of that phenomenon, which is xenophilia. Anything that comes from outside better than us.
Better than us. Yeah, God, that's okay.
So, because of that xenophilia mindset of many of us, we may incorrectly think that the people, the invaders, are coming to help us.
To help us.
We'll see that as we move forward in our history. But Barclay did not suffer from an identity crisis, as the British thought.
Well, he knew who
because
you
the
were.
British made sure that they implanted so much self-hatred and misinformation in the minds of their African subjects that it never occurred to them that Arthur Barclay would stand up for Liberia against them. It never occurred to the British that Arthur Barclay knew that he was African first and understood that the British were not friends of Africa. It never occurred to them to even suspect him of being a Garveyite, which he ended up being one of the greatest advisors to Garvey. They never suspected that he was going to take J.J. Dawson, who is one of the most militant, African-centered people that have ever lived. J.J. Dawson, our indigenous vice president, who was Barclay's vice president, was a member and head of UNIA for Africa, the United Negro Improvement Association that Marcus Garvey founded. So J.J. Dawson was Liberia's father of Pan-Africanism. Arthur Barclay is his president. Dawson is an extremely powerful vice president under Barclay. Again, we'll dedicate next week to Dawson. The reason I'm bringing up Dawson at this moment is because Barclay's choice of Dawson leads me to believe and understand that this whole time he knew what he was doing and he knew who he was.
Mm-hmm.
Because he could not have been this, for lack of a better term, just for those in America and Canada, other Western countries to understand, he couldn't have been this Tom, this Uncle Tom, and then choose Dawson as a vice president. Impossible.
No, impossible, yeah.
Because Dawson was unapologetically anti-European imperialism.
Yep.
So Dawson is his vice president. The British still don't click the hate or something going on. Because as far as they're concerned, J.J. Dawson, though he has indigenous heritage, he was raised in the Episcopal Church. He's been thoroughly brainwashed. They were wrong. They were completely wrong.
They were so sure of themselves that they underestimated him.
They underestimated this guy and his stealth mind and all of the things. I mean, this man was a man. So in this slide, I have highlighted the section that I put here to read. And if you can, okay, I'll try. So this is from the Christian Herald. It was published in 1919, so it's after his presidency. But it says, it was not until Arthur Barclay, a West Indian Negro, who went to Liberia when a child, became president that friendly relations were finally established with the natives.
Very important.
It is with these wild tribes of the interior. We're the wild people of the interior, right? Many of whom are
This
cannibals.
is funny.
Many of whom are cannibals and believers in voodooism. That Liberia's future lies today,
Lord.
just as it did a century ago. But you know, these wild tribes in the
Sorry,
interior,
but this is funny.
yeah, now the wild tribes that believe in voodooism and cannibalism.
Y'all
So,
were eating each other.
fortunately for me, our own wildness in the North and Central Territory, especially beyond you know, the gateway of the southern part of Bone County. Once you get beyond that, even Barclay didn't penetrate up to where we were because our traders, our Mano, Loma, Madingo, Bandi traders were not allowed the Liberian government to penetrate beyond what is now Suakoko district. So the wild tribes are the people that are, you know, kind of Boperu, up the river a little bit, you know, maybe stopping at where they got Zorzor area, Zorzor district, and that part of Bone County that's around there. But anything beyond that point, they had not reached yet. So we were also wild cannibals, but they didn't even reach us yet. Okay, we were wild people over there doing wild things.
Oh God!
Mind you, we were the ones bringing all the rice. We were the ones bringing all of the ivory, the gold. We were the ones bringing all of these resources to the coast. We're doing advanced agricultural projects, exporting food and other goods, but we were wild. We were still wild.
Guys. Of the the
purpose of that slide really was to kind of illustrate how the world saw us. The people who were educating us, how they saw us. And so a man like J.J. Dosen, who's the second generation of his family to be able to read and write. His mother and father were from Cape Mount, and they were settled as teachers in Maryland before Maryland had even joined Liberia. J.J. Dosen's parents went to Maryland when it was independent of the rest of Liberia as teachers, so they could speak Gribble and of course Vai and whatever other languages they picked up. But they went there as teachers and evangelists. They had their family. J.J. Dosen was born to them. But when his father is discussed, Dosen says his grandparents, the father speaks of the grandparents as being heathens. He says things like, I was born of heathen parents. So when they became baptized and Christianized, they're told that their parents are heathen. So you cut that group of people off because you are now rescued from heathenism. And if you listen to all of these indigenous people who become educated, many of them changed their names because they were born of heathen parents and they had heathen names. And so it skews history a little bit because you start seeing these people with these names like James and Matthew and these biblical names, right? And even sometimes not even biblical, just Western names that don't have anything to do with the Bible, right? But because they're divorcing themselves from heathenism, because this was the idea that they were instilling. And a lot of these people, when they started going to school, these mission schools, they were young, impressionable children. So they're not being told that, you know, yes, your parents might not be Christian, but they're still your parents and they still love you. They're being told these people are going to hell, they're heathens, and we have rescued you from them.
You can stay away from them. Before they lead you back, you can't be fully yoked with them.
So that's important to mention. And it's a painful thing, but we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
As Liberian people. The process of us becoming Christian, even before Christianity, the process of becoming Muslim meant that you had to look at your past religion as something evil.
Real quick, the name Dosen, did the spelling change in any way? Because we had, I know I have a friend from Cape Palmas, they come from that same stuff, but there is no W in their name. I think it's Dossen.
Yeah, J.J. Dosen's name doesn't have a W in it either.
Oh, okay.
J.J. Dosen is Dossen.
Okay.
It's not Dawson, it's Dosen.
Oh, Dosen.
And the Dosens are plenty in Cape Mount too. J.J. Dosen knew who he was. And this
Sure, if you are not
is a
confused.
family that they're probably connected to the Massaquoi clan, and that I haven't been able to establish. But that again, that's a show for a different day. We'll focus on Barclay today. But it's the vice president, Barclay's vice president was James Dossen,
Okay.
Dossen.
So what the slide on the slide on here? What is this?
So this is Barclay's
that's
wife with her
yeah.
students. AMA, you can go ahead.
Yes. Oh no, this is just a depiction of Barclay's wife and her native students because she opened a school for the native students, which is very important because we got this narrative that the natives couldn't go to school, and this is depicting how Barclay's wife was involved in her community, that she took a stand to educate her people because these are our people. And the native people are our people, and this is a picture here with her students.
Is she the one
Very
in the
impressive.
front?
She's the one
Yes,
seated.
yes,
Okay.
She's
yeah.
the one seated.
She's sitting with the white something in her lap. And
So she opened
yeah,
a girls' school. She opened a girls' school, and she opened a girls' school for poor indigenous children, and she educated them at no cost to them. That was one
it's
of
very
the
important.
first ladies used to do philanthropical things like that. The next slide, please. So now we're going to get into Barclay's presidency, and this is where we're going to talk about some of the loan schemes and problems. So in this time period, this is after the Berlin Conference, Africa is being colonized. Africa is now divided by Europe. Every inch of Africa except Ethiopia and Liberia are under European control.
Yeah.
Ethiopia is under siege by Italy, who they have a war and they're constantly fighting to remain sovereign. Liberia does not have the military capabilities that Ethiopia has, because in past episodes we talked about how they destroyed even our little gunboats we had. They are, for the first time, not the first time because they did it under E.J. Roy, but Liberia becomes the training ground for future economic subjugation through predatory loans. They did it under Roy. They are now doing it under Barclay, who they think is their stooge, or they think he's an idiot, but he's not. So what they've done now, they come in and they start doing the same loan scheme thing that they have always done. You have a company called the Liberian Development Company, which is not to be confused with the Liberian Development Association, which is a group of African Americans in the United States. This is a British organization. And everyone's heard of Sir Harry Hamilton Johnson, who wrote those huge voluminous books about Liberia and Belgian Congo. Sir Harry Johnson is actually an agent who comes in, and he's basically an economic hitman. He comes in for two reasons. He comes in, one, to map all of Liberia's resources, and he comes in also to document the culture. What they do before they go in to conquer people is they go and have detailed assessment of what's there. So before you come in to conquer, you kind of send an advanced team to study the people and the resources. So Harry Hamilton Johnson comes in and writes this very beautiful book. He and his team document everything that they see in Liberia that is of use to the imperialists. He also comes in to administer a loan, and he represents this company. So he's almost like a Jedi or some kind of ninja for these people. He is like their Rambo. He's their soldier. He's their foot soldier. He's going in there. He's doing the scientific categorizing of everything he sees. His team is doing that. They're also trying to tie Liberia down economically simultaneously. And the worst thing that he does, he is the first to start to distort Liberian history. in 1906. Harry Hamilton Johnson is the first to claim that the early Liberian presidents were mulattoes. The first record of anyone referring to Daniel Bashir Warner as anything other than a full-blooded African is Harry Hamilton Johnson, who refers to him as a mulatto. So some of those racist narratives are first being planted. And his book that he writes is so prestigious, it becomes the reference, the source for all books that come after. To this very day, when people write books about Liberia, they go back and quote this man.
Imagine that.
He becomes a source. And so Harry Hamilton Johnson writes outrageous things. For example, he doesn't make any distinction between any of the Muslims that he sees in Liberia. He calls everybody mandingos. Before this guy comes along, we're using words like Mohammedan, which means Muslim. He comes in and misclassifies people as mandingos, which is not even a real thing. Madinka, Malinka, these people don't use the word Madingo on themselves, but these are the people that now come in and they start to name us things that we are not. So in his categorizing of African people, he's now pretends to have dominion over African ethnicity. And he's now telling one of the largest ethnic groups in West Africa, after Samori Touré's empire of Wazulu fell, the Madinka, he's now telling them that they are Mandingo because he writes that. Now we all take it and put it on our head. It's Harry Hamilton Johnson that distorts so many things. You see him writing about, you can clearly see he's writing about Fulani people. He's also calling them Madinga because he doesn't have enough respect to show the distinction, ethnic distinction between people. He goes to Sierra Leone, he takes photographs of people in Sierra Leone and says that these are, you know, he doesn't really say they're Liberians, but he publishes in his book about Liberia. So people assume that some of these photos are Liberian. So there's a lot of distortion and falsehoods in his book. He also does a valuable service to Liberia when it comes to documenting the animals and plants that he sees. But he does a very evil thing when it comes to distorting the human beings,
the human
that
side
he categorizes in his book.
Great. Now, what is the picture? What a picture of this house? Which house is this?
So this building is where they housed the customs and all of that for Liberia. So, and this is also where they had the office and in the homes of a lot of these British agents that were residing in Liberia. Oh. So go ahead and cover this really quickly. I wanted to give that background. Don't go to the next slide yet, please.
Okay.
So please read the slide.
The 1906 loan was secured from a British consortium headed by the banker Erlanger through the intermediary of Sir Henry Johnston, the chairman of the Liberian Development Company Ltd. President Barclay had granted his company a concession with unprecedented rights and privileges for reasons of promoting internal economic development and in order to obtain the English loan.
So Barclay now gives them this loan, or acquires this loan, I'm sorry, and they borrow this money and they give it to Sir Harry Hamilton Johnson to administer. They didn't have a choice. So the way this reads is as if Barclay had a choice. He didn't have a choice, and he knew he didn't have a choice. But he allows it to happen because they don't have the power to do otherwise. They have literally their head in the lion's mouth, or I should say in the dragon's mouth. And so they are in a position right now where if they budge, Liberia is crushed. So now it becomes this game of chess. Next slide, please.
And I wanted to ask anyway.
So Liberia is teetering between losing its sovereignty completely. And Barclay is in a position where he has to figure out how to save Liberia's sovereignty. Not anger these people who think they've come in and found an easy way to overthrow the country, He knows that's what they're doing. You'll see that he knew that later.
Great.
So he can't outright say, no, y'all can't do it because who's going to stop them? That we have no military. Even if we had a military, what frontier forces, the British are even saying, oh, we'll help you form a military. Simultaneously, the same British who are doing these loans are in the hinterlands saying, oh, Liberia, you're not controlling your people in the hinterlands. So we have to do it for you because these people are in the hinterlands. They're crossing over the British territory and they're fighting our subjects. And you don't have control, so we're going to take over the hinterlands for you. So he says, okay, well, since you guys have this loan, and you're creating these security forces, you can go and you can control the hinterland for us through this company. But it's still our territory. So he's doing this little, kind of bite and blow, give and take, because they were going to do it anyway. So now the British are sending their security forces in the interior, literally going in the interior and trying to overtake gold mines that are being run by some of our indigenous kings.
Wow.
In the interior where these people used to mine their own gold and bring it. Now the British are going in there and fighting with them because they want the gold. They want the resources up Bopuru Way, up all these areas. Because they have Sierra Leone, they're pushing further east in the Gola Forest, trying to come into Liberian territory. They're not fighting only for land. It's what's in the land, what's on the land, and what's in the land that they're fighting for. So they're starting to mine gold. They're sending their subjects in there. Barclay knows what's happening, but he's trying to figure out at this point, how can I avoid our complete subjugation? And how can we protect the sovereignty of the people in our hinterland? So Barclay now, through the help of J.J. Dosen being of that Vi lineage, now starts to try to work with Massaquoi and others. So you've got Dosen underground trying to work with these indigenous people during the Barclay presidency to try to help to preserve the their way of life. Mind you, at the same time, the British have already conquered half of the Vi kingdom, all the way to the McKenna River. So that whole part of the Vi kingdom going to Kenema is under British control, used to be part of Liberia. So Massaquoi is now literally a refugee holding on to Cape Mount, trying to stop Cape Mount from being taken over by the British. Many things are happening at once. The British are also have planted among the Liberians their subjects or their loyalists, mostly of the Grebo ethnic group, who are what's his name, William Harris, who becomes an evangelist later. He was a radical. He removed the Liberian flag and erected the British flag on Liberian soil. He had to, so all of these things are happening at once. Liberia is being bombarded and Barclay is in the middle of a storm, an attack. He's under siege. Liberia is under siege from all sides. But you have so many other positive things playing out underground. Some of our indigenous kings working with the Liberian government, trying to preserve what's left of their sovereignty.
Ms. Cassell, you want to chime in real quick before we go to the next slide?
No, when we get to this part of the history, I just like for our people to understand what was going on at that time. That Liberia was not given to our forefathers on a silver plate. There's a lot to be appreciated here. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of sweat. There's a lot that went into it. So let's remember these parts. It's personal. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
we'll go to this part. The English company was allowed to the establishment of an armed security force.
The British were put in charge of the customs revenues of the Republic as a security to the British financier. Wow. 150,000 allocated for the construction of roads by the company. However, the company only constructed 15 miles of roads and placed a small launch on St. Paul River. Then it announced the funds were exhausted. Call just before you say something, please, before you say something, let me just say this.
Go ahead.
Liberia, we say, this is something I used to say, and we say, look at it, they just did it wrong. All the money they have, they just didn't even did it already. These are some of the proof that we should look at how these things happen. This thing really want to bring tears to my eyes. That we blame the wrong people. We let's look to history. It has the questions. Let's get interested in our history. Go ahead, go.
So this is not something strange, and it kind of falls into what Mr. Gaiman was saying earlier with these
Yeah.
companies and these loans, and but we're going to read it forward instead of backwards. Do you see the pattern? They give a loan, they send their people to spend the loan, but then the burden to pay back the loan falls upon our people.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, because Barclay, being the brilliant lawyer that he is, he's documenting all of this stuff.
Good.
So later on, he gets to go to court, and the loan ends up getting forgiven because he's like, look, we've already paid the loan back, and let me prove to you where all the receipts are, what they did with the money. The British company. He actually was able to successfully argue in court on behalf of Liberia because he monitored everything that they did and was able to. So everything that Liberia did to maintain its sovereignty was through intellect and not might. Liberia preserved its sovereignty by outsmarting and thinking ahead of imperialists. We didn't have the power to fight wars the way Ethiopia did. Would have been annihilated. We did not have the respect as even being treated as human beings. But we were smart enough. We had lawyers, we had negotiators that were able to defend our sovereignty through the global legal system. Unprecedented anywhere. So this is some of the stuff that our children need to know. We didn't beg for the country. Nobody gave it to us. Every step of the way, they have done everything to take away our economic sovereignty, our physical, political boundary sovereignty, and even the political sovereignty that we pretend to have. Even the politicians, typically, they install and pretend we're elected, which we'll see after Barclay. This is important. But they used the money and they wasted it, and in fact, they squandered it. And this is how they also get to this point where they are helping Liberia to create a frontier force.
So I want to believe this is the photograph of Mr. Johnston.
No, this is a photograph of the customs commissioner for Liberia. He was also British.
Okay, great.
He was also a British subject, yes. So sorry, my eyesight is not good with this little screen. I think this is a photo of some British or US. I think these are US. Okay, so Arthur Barclay is the one in the very dark clothes.
Right.
To the left of Arthur Barclay, the man who seems to be looking in the same direction with Barclay with the lighter colored coat, with his hand on his chest, that's Sir T. McCant Stewart, who was an African American that repatriated to Liberia and became a Liberian citizen. And he's another very brilliant man, a close friend of Arthur Barclay's. But they're here with some Americans. What happens is Barclay starts to use the United States against England. Barclay starts to manipulate different state powers against each other in order for his protection, the protection of Liberia. When I say his protection, I mean the protection of the country. What he's able to do is incredible. This is a photo of the I think it's a German embassy there, but what Barclay does, what the British do, is they tell Barclay they're going to help create a military force for Liberia. Because Barclay is telling them, hey, you can take your security forces for this company and you can protect your interests, by these gold mines or whatever, but you can't really, have control. So they tell him, okay, but then Barclay, since you want to push back and he starts having issues, you can keep the slides where they were, please. Just leave it at where the house is because we haven't gotten to that one yet. So Barclay, he tells Barclay that, so basically I'm trying to summarize this without boring you guys. So basically what happens, Arthur Barclay starts to push back. He wants to form his own military. He doesn't want these people out there brutalizing the indigenous people. Remember, J.J. Dawson's negotiating with them. So the British say, okay, but then we'll help you create your own military. The slide isn't necessary for what I'm saying, please. So they start, or you can just get rid of the slide for now. Let me just explain the story. It's very distracting. Sorry. So they start the frontier forces on behalf of Liberia. They send in a Willis, who is a British general, to train the frontier forces, and he brings in so-called British subjects. These British subjects are infiltrated into the frontier forces with a lot of indigenous soldiers, many of whom are from the North and Central Territory. You got some crewmen in there. When they say crewmen, they're talking about Grebo Bassa and Clow people, those coastal southeastern, central to southeasterners. And then you've also got different ethnic groups mixed up in this new frontier force. But what's really important is that he brings with him British loyalists, what they consider to be British subjects. Some indigenous people who join the frontier forces are loyal to Great Britain and not to Liberia. So what they end up doing is they plan a coup because Barclay is being stubborn. The British now are starting to realize Barclay tricked us. He got us with this loan deal. He's smarter than we thought he was. Let's kill him. Let's kill him and let's just take over the country. And we'll make it look like it was an indigenous coup. We'll make it look like the frontier forces, the military rose up against the government, killed the president, and took over. And they're telling the British subjects, within the Liberian frontier forces, that when they take over, we'll plant the British flag and we'll make you guys proxies to the British government. So they plan to overthrow the Liberian government using this newly created Liberian military, which is being controlled by the British. Does this sound familiar?
Oh, yes, it does.
So what ends up happening is Dawson gets intelligence that this plot is happening. He gets intelligence that this plot is happening. And they're able to use their own militia. So Liberia didn't have a military, but they had armed citizen militia that was not being controlled by the British. And those armed Liberian citizen militia, mostly native boys also, went in and put down the coup attempt and saved the country from being overthrown by the British. If it was not for this event and for people within the AFL tipping off the senior officials in the government, if they had not planted their own counterintelligence to watch the British while the British thought that they were so smart, Liberia would be Sierra Leone today. We would not exist as a country at all. This event in history is extremely important. And I'm glossing over it because this is not the specific thing, but we'll do a different show where we specifically talk about this thwarted coup, and we'll also talk about Lomax and the Bandi soldiers, or they call them chiefs, who were killed in the North Central Territory as well. We'll put those, they say they hung the Bandi chiefs and all this stuff. We'll put all of that together and do a show about those two things in better detail. But I just want to give a quick synopsis of this occurrence, this attempted coup. But it actually is so detailed, it deserves a show by itself. Very interesting. It's just that if I get too much into detail, it would take another hour. So we'll do a different show specifically about British infiltration and how the African-American troops had to come in, take over the AFL from the British, and then the rest is history. That's how America ended up getting control but it was originally the Black Buffalo Soldiers that came in after we overthrew the British. African Americans came to the rescue of Liberia. And then those trained soldiers from the United States then become the trainers of the armed forces of Liberia. And they go all the way into the interior under President Howard. And we'll talk about that more when we do Howard in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Real quick. Ladies and gentlemen, this is, I'm telling you, if you went to school in Liberia all your life like we did, up to high school, you didn't learn this thing.
No.
I doubt you learned this when you went to the University of Liberia or any of the other universities. You are getting all into one here. We are also doing a fundraiser here to support this station, carry a program like this around the country by way of radio. So at the end of the year, we are asking you to do a general donation to focus on Liberia. The number is scrolling there, so we can be able to educate, elevate all things Liberia. And what she's doing here is free of charge. This takes a lot of work to research and package this. It takes time and effort, and she does it free. So it will behoove us to make sure that this kind of program is carried, nationwide. All the local radio stations, community radio stations, if need be, to carry. And for this to happen, we need your help. So please do a donation as much as you can. There's nothing too small, nothing too big. We will take it and make sure that Liberians get this education. I'm here and I'm having a great time. I'm enjoying this. I'm in class. So the two beautiful ladies want to say thank you for what you're doing, and let's continue the show. Let's go to the next slide.
So we're running out of time. I tried to remove a lot of slides, but I wanted to give a quick synopsis of the coup attempt.
Please
but
do.
This slide we're looking at right now is just basically talking about our exports. Our chief exports were rubber, palm oil, cocoa, coffee, ivory, ginger, and camwood.
That's it?
We imported cotton. We also at one point used to export cotton, but at this point by 1907, we're importing cotton and other provisions. Wood and iron that were already manufactured and refined, and also gin is being imported. So you're starting to see under Barclay, the Liberian economy is starting to shift from being export. They're really trying to make Liberia a consumer nation and not a producer nation. So this is a economic effort, a collective economic effort of the West to try to stop Africa from producing for Africa. So they want Africans to produce things that they can extract, like rubber and other things like that, and they want to make Africa consumers. So they want to manipulate the trade relationship in such a way that provisions that we need for subsistence food is coming from outside, so we become dependent. And then the things that we're actually producing are our own raw materials that are really more used to outsiders than ourselves. Unfortunate situation, but this is what colonialism was intended to do. And unfortunately for Liberia, it did not escape the economic aspect of colonialism, because there was no way they were going to successfully economically colonize and physically colonize the rest of West Africa and Africa as a whole if Liberia was allowed to its economic sovereignty. It would have stood as a beacon of hope to the rest of Africa. So now Liberia becomes the enemy of imperialism. And they're going to hit Liberia with everything they have going forward to make sure that it doesn't serve its intended purpose, which is to be that shining light for the rest of Africa, to know that African people can be self-determinant and can also be equal competitors with other people in the world. So Liberia becomes an affront, an antithesis to white world supremacy. So they will try every aspect of divide and conquer. They start to manipulate the children, the next generation, the children of the people who stood up for Liberia, then become the torchbearers of imperialism at this point. After Barclay, you are going to see a succession of people, really after Howard. Howard, being an indigenous person, also falls victim to a lot of the manipulation. We'll see that in 2 weeks. Next week, when we talk about Dosen, we're going to, kind of, show how this unfolds. By the time Howard's presidency is over, Liberia is now well broken down. And our leaders then become basically proxy leaders for imperialism at that point. But this is some of the last, the last stance of the Pan-Africanist spirit. It really, Barclay and Dosen is really where that becomes the real last stance of the Pan-Africanist spirit for Liberia. So all of the presidents before, for the most part, not all, but many of the presidents before carried this torch. This torch is, I won't say it's completely put out, but the torch is definitely dimmed after Barclay, and especially after Dosen dies, when he becomes Chief Justice and dies after Howard, and then that's it for Liberia. So
let me draw your attention quick to
mm-hmm.
The numbers there on the screen. It says our export is $600,000 annually, but our import is $650,000. That putting us upside down, if you can look at it, because we are sending out less and bringing in more debt. So
we are sending out almost the exact same. Compared to today, it's far worse than this.
Yeah, I was just trying to
I mean, 600,000, 600, yes. 600.
The deficit imbalance we've been, like you say, because of the imperialist ideas and imperialism, their imposition of their will. We have always been in the red for a very long time, even when we're up to 2 million people.
So this is the Chicago Daily News projection about our population. Nobody did a survey in the hinterlands to tell us exactly how many people were there. It was a projection. So it's counting, and also at this point, they're counting, people that they don't need, they're just projecting. The 600,000 and the 650,000 compared to what comes after this those are good numbers. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to see those numbers today in 2023.
That's correct.
Is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost even, but this is where they're starting to shift that economic imperialism. We're no longer exporting food. 50 years earlier, we were exporting rice still at a large scale, at a very large scale, where with but we're still having our northern kings in the North Central Territory up what is now considered Barpolu or Bopuru at the time, and beyond what is now Lofa, what is now Nimba. They were still bringing ivory. The coffee plantations are on the coast. You have these massive coffee farms all along the coast up the St. Paul River. They're producing cocoa in these areas, ginger, but so you've got exports by both indigenous rulers and by wealthy farmers on the coast. All of that is being counted in the economy, but unfortunately, what is being brought in is now outweighing what is going out. And mind you, this is a time also when our ships, we no longer have ships. E.J. Roy has been lynched. His shipping company, everything has gone. Liberia, the ships that were built for regional trade by former President Daniel Bashir Warner, that has been thwarted. So everything, all the great strides of previous presidents, all of that has broken down. Our 2 warships are no longer existing. Those were damaged and destroyed and sunk under Coleman by the same British. So Liberia is now broken. They have cut off all of our wings, all of our outlets. So Barclay is president at a very, very difficult time. But he brilliantly escaped what would have been, anyone would have said it was inevitable. This is a real David and Goliath story. The stone that Barclay, if he is the proverbial David, the stone Barclay used to knock Goliath to the ground, proverbially, because he didn't actually kill the British, but he did stunt them and prevent them from doing what they wanted to do. The stone that Barclay used was his mind.
His mind.
The weapon that Barclay used to defend Liberia was his mind, his brilliance. So we can just click through the next slides. I just want to show some photos. We don't really have time to go into much of it.
Yeah.
But this is President Arthur Barclay and part of his cabinet. You've got behind him there the grandson.
Excuse me. Okay. The grandson behind him?
That's the grandson of Elijah Johnson.
Okay.
Son of Hillary Johnson behind him there. And okay, so I just want to point Elijah and yeah. So these guys are also avid Pan-Africanists. We'll get into that when we do the docent episode. Next slide, please. Yeah, we can skip over this for now. I mean, you know what, AMA, please read that if you can see it.
Okay.
Commenting
on this incident, the American Commission of 1910 declared, but for the prompt and judicious action of the Liberian executive aid by the American minister resident, the following would presently have been the situation: a British gunboat in the harbor, a British officer in command of the frontier force, and a large number of British subjects among the enlisted men, a British official in charge of the Liberian customs, a British officer in command of the Liberian gunboat block, a British regiment in the streets of Monrovia. Jesus.
So this is what was happening. This is what was happening when they were about to overthrow Barclay. That's why I wanted her to read it. I wanted you to see what the Americans were writing. This is what they were. This is what he was faced with. These people were already marching to victory. They thought they had overthrown the government. Because, and they hated Liberia for the malice against Liberia. I want this to be clear. The malice against African people around the world is for no reason other than African people wanting to be self-determinate human beings like other human beings. We are the only threat that we pose to the rest of the world for which they have such malice towards us is that we dare to want to be self-determinate human beings like everyone else.
Like everyone else.
We have never gone and invaded and conquered and stepped on anyone.
No.
The only wrong that we have done, that Liberia has done, is to want to be free, is to want to have the human rights, the God-given human rights that are bestowed on all human beings. We are treated this way and conspired against for wanting to assert our human beingness. This is important. Next slide, please.
Okay.
You know, more British subjects. We're not going to get into all.
What are we looking at here in this photo?
Oh, this is a view of Monrovia from on a hilltop.
Okay.
And so, and these are some British subjects. This is really just getting into the whole situation about this. So Harry Hamilton Johnson and these other British people. This is just, you know, what I kind of skimmed through without having to go through all of this, but basically talking about their manipulation of the Liberian government. But I said we'll get into it in another episode. Next slide. These are some photos. This photo on the left is just his name is Mr. Morris, Mr. J.L. Morris. He was a typical Liberian of American descent. An average, you know, citizen of the Republic. On the right there, you have Sir Arthur Barclay in one of his diplomatic missions in Europe, in England, when he went to go argue on behalf of the Liberian government to remove that ratchet loan agreement, that predatory loan agreement, and he went there adequately prepared with all of the details, spending reports, and showing how Harry Hamilton Johnson and others manipulated and also committed crimes, financial crimes, under the auspices of the Liberian Development Company. So this is a photograph of the brilliant Arthur Barclay when he went to go defend not only Liberia, but all of Africa, really, against imperialism. Next slide. This is a group of native schoolgirls in Liberia. So this is a teacher from Atlanta. This is an African American teacher named Miss Anna E. Hall. She ran this girls' school. There were a lot of girls' schools in Liberia. Liberia had more educated women in Africa than any other country at this point. And many of those educated, in fact, most of those educated women that were literate were indigenous women. These are the kind of schools that produced Angie Brooks, who was a Gola woman. These are the kind of schools that produced all of these great women that rose to prominence. This was a time when women did not have suffrage in the United States. Many girls didn't even go to school in the Western world. Here is Liberia educating women.
Women.
During Arthur Barclay's era, and even before
Something
that.
to note.
Our neighboring countries that were under the subjugation of the British and the French were not, especially the French, were not focused on the education of women. And this is, I think we can end on this. This can be the last slide. Basically, this is Arthur Barclay, giving permission to a philanthropic group to open a school in Liberia. I cannot see that. I think it says Executive Mansion, Monrovia, Liberia, the 15th of April, 1907.
1907.
Okay. You can see it better than me. I'll stream
Yeah,
my eyes.
okay. Sir,
Okay.
yeah, sir,
Okay.
sir, referring to your project for the establishment of an industrial mission and school in the Gibi district, Grand Bassa County, I hasten to assure you that I heartedly endorse the idea and trust that you will get the necessary financial support in the United States and elsewhere for its successful initiation. The government will grant 1,000 acres of land, and in addition, will give all countenance and protection and such financial assistance as may be within its means. I think the school should be planned on ample basis so as to attract the attention of the hidden people among whom it is proposed to found it with heartiest desire for your success. Yours faithfully, signed Arthur Barclay, President of the Republic of Liberia.
So this was published in 1909. In the missionary story sketches. So the reason I want to end on this note, this is a myth in Liberia that our people that were educated through mission schools, that these missionaries just came on their own and opened up these schools, and the Liberian government didn't have anything to do with it, that other people came and educated us. Every single Liberian president up until this point has done everything in its weak way to advance education and, yes, Christianity into the interior. This was a culture war. Even Dawson and Howard, who were indigenous people, wanted to advance Christianity because they believed very strongly that that was the way to the future. And they also combined in their minds at this period in time, Christianity and civilization in their minds were one and the same. Education, Christianity, civilization, all the same. So they wanted to open up schools. They wanted to advance this Western idea of education to the interior so that in Dawson's mind, if I can be who I am, everyone in the interior can be like me. But we have to open these schools. In Barclay's mind, they didn't see themselves any different. They sincerely thought that the people in the interior were heathens, because that is how the world saw traditional African culture, as heathenism, as devil worship. And they sincerely thought that the way to pull African people out of our heathenism was to educate us in the Western sense, and more importantly, to baptize us and save our souls. This is just a fact of history. This is how they thought. We can look at them today and judge them in hindsight and say, but we weren't savages, we weren't heathens, we believed in God and we just worship God differently. We can say this today. But even today, many of us Native people, right now, I go to like, bro, my little gamosi on, it was, oh, that thing, that witchcrafting. I remember one time I came from Ghana and I had cowrie shell jewelry. I love African jewelry. And people thought that it was witchcraft. So even our Native people have been taught that anything African is evil. Even today, in this modern day. So imagine what it was like in the 1800s, around 1900, 1905. They were terrified of African traditionalists. They thought these people were all devil worshippers that were doing bad things. In some sense, you know, some of the things we were doing were bad. We were still practicing, you know, almost like chattel slavery in the interior, you know, brutalizing women. There were a lot of wars and violence, but our traditional ways are not evil. And other cultures around the world were allowed to incorporate, especially Europe, when Rome conquered Europe and gave them Christianity. And yes, Rome is separate from Western Europe. Western Europe was conquered by Rome. And when they gave them Christianity, they allowed them to keep a lot of their traditional practices and incorporate it into Christian culture.
Yes.
African people were not afforded that dignity when they were baptized and Christianized. European pagan rituals are things that Africans are practicing today. We're decorating Christmas trees. You know, we don't even know where that's coming from. We're decorating Christmas trees. We're putting gifts under Christmas trees. We're having Easter eggs. We believe in Easter bunnies. We practice winter solstice, and we call it Christmas. We practice the European pagan fertility rituals. We call it Easter. We got all the European pagan stuff mixed up with our Christianity, but we were not afforded the same dignity of having our traditional culture integrated with Christianity. We were told our traditions were evil. But our evil pagan rituals do not jive with Christianity. The mission schools are telling us, oh, Christians don't eat kola nut. Christians don't carry these heathen names. But we're allowed to use European heathen names because many of the Western names we use are European heathen names. They're not biblical. And many of the practices we practice are not biblical. They're from European heathen cultures. So the unfairness of it, is what caused a lot of the conflict too. Telling our people that as soon as you become baptized, you were born of heathen parents. How do you rip a child from their parents and their ancestors in such a way? And call it godly? That's why I said, you know, salvation in Christianity, the way it was introduced to Africa was not really done in a fair way to African people. And that is some of the root of the conflict as well. Even to this day, we have to be fair.
Wow. Thank you very much, Professor. We're going a little over 2 hours. This is beautiful for me. I think we should do this. We should do this over and over. And I think next Saturday would be awesome. Who would be what's next Saturday? Is it JJ Dawson next Saturday?
Next Saturday, JJ Dawson. I think I'm doing that with Jabari Lamb. I'm not sure. Somebody else from the History Guild will do JJ Dawson with me next Saturday. I'll announce it before.
Ms. Cassell, I think if you can come on next Saturday like me, I'm a spectator, I'm a student, I love this stuff. It would be great to come out to hear you guys.
I'm a student, everything.
Yes, well, I mean, you are a great student as well. We're gone over 2 hours. People are loving this stuff. As we get into our closing, Ms. Campbell, I know, Ms. Cassell, I know you got to go to either church or something early over there. Please give us your closing statement.
I don't go to church.
Okay, well, that's fine. You get a whole Sunday. Your closing, ma'am.
Okay, my closing will always be what I say every day in my daily life. Liberians need to know their history. Liberians need to get away from the different regions, the different tribes, the different opinions of each other, and come to a we and a us. There is no more they came, they were. Our people came and we are. And if we do not get interested in our history, we will not know us enough to love us. To know somebody is to love the person. To know a thing is to love that thing. There are great things that Liberians have done. Liberians have done the story in our founding, our diversity is what should keep us together. And as long as we decide to be separated, we will remain to this same place. And I'm talking to every Liberian fellow, you, whosoever. There is no they. We are us. Our separation has benefited the outsider. It has not benefited Liberia. So let's do it now for Liberia. You need to know Liberia. Please, my people are begging you. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Family.
Yes, Lata said it all. Thank you, my dear sister, for being on here with me and Jerome. Jerome, thank you for sitting in for Dennis. I enjoy when you host. You bring a different, twist to the show. So I appreciate all of you for sticking with us as long as you did. Those of you who watched for that, I think we went over 2 hours. But I will. Some of the things that I tabled, I will bring back next week when we talk about Dosen because it's also relevant to him. He was vice president during Arthur Barclay's time. So, it's still relevant. We'll carry Barclay Dosen's story forward with more of an emphasis next time on Dosen. I want to say that the reason I'm going to focus on Dosen is because he was erased from history completely. And he was too important, not only to Liberia, but to African Americans, to Caribbean Americans, to Africans in general. Dosen was a Pan-Africanist. He was one of the leading thinkers. He was also a lawyer. He became the first indigenous Supreme Court justice. As far as I know, he was the first. That's who knows who some of those other people were. I haven't done a genealogy, but the way they have suppressed indigenous leadership and washed them away, made us to believe that none of our people had ever done anything except hold gun and kill president to take power, is a shame. It's a shame, and it's not the truth. And we are going to resurrect our heroes and put them on the pedestals that they belong on, so our children have somebody to look up to, somebody to believe in, some shoulders to stand on as they move forward. Liberia is not something for us to be ashamed of. It's something for us to be proud of. It will raise the self-esteem of our country if we really know the truth. It's not your fault. No. It was kept from you intentionally.
It
is not your fault that you don't know these stories. It's not your fault that you have been misled. This was deliberate. And that's the other thing I want people to know. This is not because people are lazy and they want to learn Liberian history. Most of the narrative was intentionally false. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame your scholars. This was an intentional thing, and we have come to a place where we can break that yoke of disinformation and tell the truth about ourselves and who we are. Good, bad, ugly, everything. We can put everything together and tell the whole story. Everything not fine in our history, but it's ours. It's our story. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was History 101. We're going from civics to History 101 in college, and you have not been here, you will love this. When I look at the list of those people that she named, you have heard those names, you have seen those children, you have seen those families, now you remember some of those families. Next Saturday, if you're from the Southeast, especially from Cape Palmas or from the Maryland County area, and some part of Cape Mount, you are going to delve into your family history. J.J. Dawson. I know in Baza we have the Dawsons, very, very formidable people, beautiful folks, friends of mine, those I went to school at Baza High School. So I know the Dawsons very well. And I'm going to be glued to this channel next week to find out about J.J. Dawsons. What is it that they brought to the table?
Dawson, not Dawson. Dawson.
Yeah, Dawson. We call them Dawson, but it's Dawson. It's Dawson. Okay. So their contribution to the Liberian history we are going to delve into that. We cannot dismiss the sacrifices that the settlers made, even though those are from the indigenous background. We advocate for our own, but we cannot dismiss the sacrifices they made. So we have to look at those in next Saturday. And those of you from the Southeast, please tune in, and we will have a great show. Mr. Anthony is here. This is all yours.
We are Liberia. Liberia is our home.